kindly inviting me to present my paper today on M.L.286-Eothen, particularly in this poignant context of this year, 2020, being the 80th anniversary year of Operation Dynamo. So I'm a postgraduate research student at the University of Portsmouth, and I'm in my first year of my PhD in the School of Art, Design and Performance, although I have a master's degree in archaeological practice from Birkbeck, University of London. So therefore, my presentation today is not going to be about my current PhD research, as it's very early days. Instead, I am presenting my past research and a few new insights into the vibrant biography of M.L.286-Eothen. Since we are in November, the month of remembrance, I thought I would preface my presentation about M.L.286 with a few words about one of her commanders, Lieutenant Geoffrey Stephen Alfrey, who is a member of the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve. What are those distant shapes dimly ahead? Brave ships that fought and fell, brave men who died. Shadows of yesterday, living though dead, sleeping eternally under the tide. Those ships and men are gone, their spirit carries on, leading the grey patrol over the sea. So Lieutenant Geoffrey Stephen Alfrey was commander of ML286 in December 1916 until the 21st of September 1917. And if you can see my little cursor there, it's very difficult to make out that year, that day. So I just sort of left it as a question mark, but that is the full archival document that's available from the National Archives. And Lieutenant Alfrey was also a war artist, and I really love these two contrasting pictures of the motor launches. They're sort of set in different kind of settings in a calmer sea and seas with rougher winds, and the contrasting colors as well are quite beautiful. So on the 29th of September in 1918, Lieutenant Alfrey was commander of ML247, which was part of a 4-boat flotilla. And they entered into St. Ives Bay, and there were gale-forced winds that day, and his ML developed engine trouble, and it hit Ore Rock. Now, these little MLs were loaded up with depth bombs that contained 250 pounds of TNT. And so when the ML hit Ore Rock, it just blew up on impact, and all crew members, including Lieutenant Alfrey, were killed except for one. His body was never found. He died at the age of 29, was survived by his wife, Alice Maud Mary, his daughter, Stephanie, and his onboard child, Rosemary. He's commemorated on the Portsmouth Naval Memorial, as well as the Birchington Achill War Memorial in Kent. I'm very grateful to my friend David Jarmers for me. I personally haven't been yet to visit this memorial, but you can see Lieutenant Alfrey's name just at the top there where my cursor is. I leapt upon the rock and clasped the sea maid in my arms, for I was quite enchanted by the sweetness of her charms. They say that the dead die not, but remain near to the rich airs of their grief and mirth. And that little bit of sea is what the Portsmouth Naval Memorial overlooks in Portsmouth. And on Saturday, the 7th of November, I'm very new to Portsmouth. I've just moved here to do my uni. I decided to explore the area of Southsea, and I just happened upon the Portsmouth Naval Memorial, and I was really overcome with emotion, and I had a good wander around that day, and the sky was really clear and beautiful, as you can see from these photographs. And I was looking for Lieutenant Alfrey's name, and I couldn't find it. Oops, sorry, my slide isn't progressing. Oh, there we go. And so then I saw this particular tribute to the raids on Zeebrugge and Ostend, and the motor launches were really instrumental at Zeebrugge and Ostend, and it was their real moment of glory. And the aim of the Zeebrugge and Ostend raids was to block the Bruce Ship Canal at Zeebrugge and Ostend with old cruisers filled with cement, and the MLs along with the CMBs were to provide a smoke screen to shield the approach of the assault vessels, and the MLs were also to rescue the block ship crews. The rescue of the crews of the block ships by the motor launches, which had been standing by under heavy fire of every caliber, was carried out in the gallant manner which distinguished the work of the crews of the motor launches generally throughout the action. At the Zeebrugge raid, the duty of making smoke screens and laying smoke floats was imposed on a large fleet of motor launches. Without the services of these little vessels for this duty and for inshore work generally, an attack of this nature could hardly have been considered. The operations on the Belgian coast between March and November 1918 gave the officers and the men of the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve in the motor launches opportunities of winning distinction and honor. The zest of these officers and men compels one's admiration. That's said by Vice Admiral Sir Roger Keyes. Now, also, so it is associated with the Zeebrugge and Ostend raids, which is going to be part of my research, is the Zeebrugge concert. So just to sort of read a little bit what Lieutenant Gordon S. Maxwell wrote in this book, this little book was published mainly as an outcome of numerous requests for copies of its contents, many of which were sung or recited at the Zeebrugge concert in the wardroom of HMS Argont at Dover the night before we went into action. And this is just an example of what was performed. Lieutenant Maxwell wrote A Perfect Night. He said it's the popular tune of the day, Perfect Day, written by Carrie Jacobs Bond in 1909. And that, just to the right of the screen, is the poster for the concert. And you can see the name Oswald. Well, that's a reference to Lieutenant Oswald Robinson. And very sadly, he was the second officer to be killed at Zeebrugge. And a couple of years ago, I had the great privilege and honor of hearing Dr. Anthony Firth, Director of Fjord, speak about the raids on Zeebrugge and Ostend at this centenary conference. My constant thanks to Dr. Anthony Firth for being such a guiding light in my own research about the MLs. So carrying on, I went to explore a little bit more of my neighborhood, and I went into the Cathedral of St. John the Evangelist. And there's really beautiful memorial plaques to the war dead, and very touching when you read that a young bugler at the age of 15 had passed away or had been killed in line of action. So I was determined to find Lieutenant Alfrey's name because I had not found it on that Saturday on the 7th, and I was feeling quite upset about that. And I was determined to find his name because all of my research showed that his name was definitely there. And when I arrived, it was the sun was setting. It was just after 4 o'clock. And when I approached the memorial, I realized that I had nothing with me. I didn't have a flower. And for the first time in my life since I was a child, I was not wearing a poppy because of COVID-19 contact list. I don't carry change anymore. And I never had the opportunity to purchase a poppy. And so I was feeling quite bereft. And I decided that I would just stand by myself at the memorial and recite some hymns and prayers in my own faith and offer it up to all the names that I saw before me, the names of all faiths or of no faith, just thanking them for their sacrifice. And then as soon as I finished that, my own private tribute, I looked down and then I found Lieutenant Alfrey's name. So it was a really moving experience for me. It was a really personal experience because I've researched M.L.286 for since 2017, and I've got to really feel that I know these men, and it was a very emotional experience to find his name. Dawn was theirs in sunset and the colors of the earth. This is another painting by Lieutenant Alfrey. And then as I walked away, the seas were so calm and the sun was setting. So I almost felt like Lieutenant Alfrey was kind of giving me his blessing on my research. And that memorial that you see there is in the memory of the 48 officers and men who died during the epidemic of the yellow fever aboard HMS Aboukir at Jamaica in 1873 to 1874. Well, let's go now and meet M.L.286. I met a little motor launch. She was 2 years old, said she. Her hull was thick with barnacles, which stuck her to the key. So this is her setting today. So she is actually hulked between the dry dock at B.J. Wood and Son Boatyard and the 8. And Isleworth 8 is actually one of my very favorite places in London. It's very scenic. It's got some historic buildings, but it also boasts a fantastic Anglo-Saxon fish trap, which is one of my favorite things to visit when I'm there. Now, this is a before and after photograph of M.L.286 or Eothen. So there she is in the 1980s, and there she is today, looking a little bit more neglected. It was a houseboat in Windsor, and somebody brought it here to be worked on. They worked on it doing wooden planking. When it came here, it never left. It was sold a few times, I believe, while it was in the yard, and families moved on it and moved off. And then the last family just left overnight and disappeared, and then we ended up with it. And that's Stephen Wood, who is the owner of B.J. Wood and Son Boatyard. I'm just going to play you a little video of M.L.286. And you can see that she's actually a really dynamic part of this boatyard landscape, as well as being a dynamic part of the eight at Isleworth. So she's a part of the mud, the trees, the birds singing, the clouds, the sun. She's a real part. She's really embedded in a part of this vibrant landscape, and her story is ongoing. So she might look quite still and motionless, but she's nothing but. She's a very spirited vessel with a really great story to tell. So we're going to continue to tell that now. So there I am at the boatyard, and the picture on the right is me in ML286 getting ready to clean and record her. That's another picture for between the dry dock and the 8. And the spirit being out there, wise fragrance in the hair. And I love this quote from Rupert Brooke. He was also a member of the RNVR, but very sadly, he in 1915 he was bitten by a mosquito and developed septicemia from that, and he died. And he's buried on the Greek island of Skyros. So he's a part of the story of the RNVR. And why I like this quote is because it just really illustrates how much of a spirit ML286 has. And you can sort of see that the branches are almost like her hair, and you can smell that beautiful day with the beautiful environment of the clouds and that bright blue sky. We're going to be listening to some of the voices involved with the Motor Launch Patrol. Just to the left of the screen, there is Lieutenant Eric P. Dawson, who's Canadian, and there's a picture there of one of the books written by Lieutenant Donald Borness Maxwell. Again, he wrote The Rhymes of the Motor Launch, and there's another reference to Rupert. Well, ML286 is at a very much site, so if you don't want to get your paws wet, grab your wellies and let's go and explore, and let's go to the movies. So what's in a name, Shakespeare asks us? Well, the motor launches were known as MLs, movies, the New Navy, Sutphens, the Grey Patrol, the Mosquito Fleet, the Fringes of the Fleet, the Stinkbot Special, the Semi-Submersible. And then there's this concept of romance where it talks about the motor launches. In the whole history of shipbuilding, there's been nothing more romantic in conception and achievement than the Mosquito Fleet of the submarine chasers, or MLs, as the British call them. And that's a quote by Henry R. Sutphen, who is the managing director of the Electric Launch Company. The romantic personal element in which a war fought largely by kid reservists and small boats is bound to be rich. So Dawson had the job of censoring the cruise letters home. And again, he talks about the romance. This is the romance of the penny stamp. There is a romance too about the strange journeyings of letters to those at sea in wartime. And action, why movies? Well, dubbed the movies because of their activity in a seaway, the ubiquitous MLs earn the title in a better sense because of their never-ending activity in performing all sorts of nasty jobs for which they were never intended. So what were some of those movie roles? Patrolling for submarines, sweeping for mines in the channels ahead of ships, convoying merchant vessels, towing deadly Q-type caravan for lurking submarines, and the laying of mines. We are there to sweep mines, familiarly called eggs. There's something about this name movie which seems to fit, for the ML is nothing if not movement. Her movement is more like a drunken streak of lightning. You require sea legs, sea arms, sea head, and a kind of armor-plated stomach well described as the dreadnought type. The motion of a movie is something utterly strange and different even to the best sailorman. There is no languid pitch or roll. It is a series of unexpected leaps or bounds. The seas become confused and choppy, and the movie, like a polo pony who has not yet been broken to her step, jibbed, sheared, and cavorted. Oh dear. So ML286, what was she known as? Cordon Rouge, Eothen. She's a veteran of World War I and World War II. She's Dunkirk Little Ship. And I personally think she's got courage, personality, charm, zest, vibrancy. She's spirited and dynamic. And there's a photograph again from the 1980s with her Dunkirk plaque. So the birth of the movies. The menace of the German submarine warfare becomes increasingly grave, and in February 1915, a commission of British engineers, along with the well-known English shipbuilder and ordnance expert Sir Trevor Dawson, managing director of Vickers Armament Works and representative of the Admiralty, they arrive in New York. And they visit Standard Motor Construction Company, and they have a meeting with Henry R. Sutphen, who's the managing director of the Electric Launch Company. My idea was to have a mosquito fleet big enough thoroughly to patrol the waters of Great Britain, each of them carrying a quick firing gun. I said that my preference was for a type about 80 feet in length with a speed of some 19 knots. So on the 9th of April, a contract is signed for 50 75-foot MLs to be delivered in 1 year's time. But due to the neutrality of the United States, Sutton decides that the MLs are to be prefabricated at the Elko shipbuilding yard in Bayonne, New Jersey, but they're to be assembled in Quebec, Canada. Timbers for the boats were cut and shaped in Bayonne and delivered by train to Quebec for assembly. Frames, knees, keels, decks, wiring, harnesses, fittings, machinery were all sent to Canada. On the 1st of May, the master boat is in the frame at Elko, but also on this day, you've got the civilian ocean liner, the Lusitania, that sailed her last voyage. And on the 7th of May, it was the sinking of the Lusitania by a German U-boat. So Sutphin receives a cablegram from the Admiralty ordering 500 additional Sutphins, and they're to be completed by the 15th of November, 1916. So 550 mLs in 488 days, and the shipbuilding yard in Quebec is enlarged, and they actually have an additional yard as well. So you've got the Canadian Vickers Limited and the Davies Shipbuilding and Repairing Company Limited in Quebec. Is there any city in the world that stands so nobly as Quebec? The citadel crowns a headland 300 feet high that juts boldly out into the St. Lawrence. What is it in this self-eclipse, shadows soft and passingly about the corners of her lips, the smile that is essential sheen? You can see this little smile here on M.L.286's transom. It is true they are fabricated, not built, but each boat has its own personality, and the commander of one chaser can tell at a glance each one of the other boats and who commands her. Every movie has a personality. On this particular day, our movie seemed to be beating out joy music from her throbbing engines. So the key about the MLs was the standardization. So each boat was fitted with two 220 horsepower standard engines, which had to come up to certain definite standards in a special rigorous trial. These men worked very long hours, 11 hours each, 9 hours straight, 2 hours overtime, and time and a half. And the parts were built to sample drawings and specifications. And this gave absolute interchangeability of parts appreciated by the Allied navies. The bronze struts used to hold the shafts as well as the quadrants and rudders were made by the Tiffany Studios Company. The foundries that ordinarily handled our orders for bronze castings for the quadrants and rudders could not turn out the quantity now required in time, but the Tiffany Studios, who had never before turned out any metal work save that of an ornamental and artistic nature, managed to do the job in time and do it well. So all deliveries were to be made at the launching slips in the St. Lawrence River. After the first 50, ice brings this to a halt, so they have to be shifted by rail to the open port in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and then they do this trial run, which what they called with the skeleton, the terrible lizard, and the trial horse. British overseers took formal delivery. The MLs are towed away in storage basins, and each ship carried 4 MLs. A fleet of 130 transports was required for all 550 MLs in their space and standardized parts, and they all arrived safely. Cooperating with aircraft and in the Channel, the North Sea, Mediterranean, at the Dardanelles, and in the Adriatic, the MLs attracted the attention of the French and Italians. The large orders placed for standard motors and completed vessels, bringing the total number of MLs up to 720. So what was the fighting equipment of a movie? They had short caliber 3-inch guns. They had a depth bomb, as we talked about earlier, containing 250 tons of TNT, and lance bombs, 14-pound bombs on the end of a 4.5-foot handles. So the MLs for hunting U-boats, they worked with seaplanes and blimps, and all MLs carried portable directional hydrophones, accurate enough to tell the listener within about 2 degrees the direction of the approach of any sort of vessel. The listener was trained to eliminate everything but the sound of the submarine. Well, this is the end of a perfect night near the end of our ML frail, and our cabin looks like a cistern burst in the midst of a jumble sail. But we never dream of the glory gained or the DSOs will win, but sadly think as we gaze around, what a hell of a mess we're in. And what we did for the Totally Thames Festival this year, I sing with the London Sea Shanty Collective, and we actually put that poem to the tune that Lieutenant Maxwell originally set it to. And if you want to listen to that, there's the link there you can see at the top of the screen. So life aboard the movies. I remember those first days on patrol when guileless subs had yet to learn how MLs pitch and roll. The jet black night, the days of fog, the gale's fierce steering strife. We didn't get much comfort, but my gosh, we did see life. So they were built for speed, not for comfort. Everything was dwarfed except the horsepower, just room to move around and nothing more. Forward are the crew's quarters, where with a marvelous economy of space, 7 men live and sleep in 20 feet of space. The officers' quarters are about as grandly miniature and are ambitiously divided into a wardroom where two can turn around and three becomes a crush, while the after cabin is spacious enough for two, provided one makes room for the other by remaining pressed tight against the side in his bunk. Crushed in somewhere midships between the engine room and the gloriously named wardroom is the galley, taking a space of about 4 feet athwartship. I'm afraid I cannot tell in restrained tones of that sinkhole of iniquity in the galley, with its tintinnabulation of shifting pots, pans, and burning concoctions flung in a heavy sea over paraffin burners. There's often this complaint that always the food smelt or tasted, of paraffin. Button tight the oilskin coat, towel around the neck. We will have the sea tonight washing down the deck. It's choppy in the channel, so it's easy to foretell that we will have a rotten time in HMSML. There are days when, however much you may wrap yourself up in oilskins, you will still get soaked, and your sea boots act as involuntary foot baths of ice cold. Towards midday, the wind abates a little, but not so the cold, and oilskins give place to duffel coats, thick wool, yellowy brown coats with hoods, and which, if worn with these turned up, baggy trousers of the same material, give the appearance of a ship being manned by giant teddy bears. Sing a song of a frail M.L., may the Lord have mercy upon us, rolling about in an oily swell, may the Lord have mercy upon us, out on a high explosive spree, petrol, lyddite, and TNT, looking for U-boat 303, may the Lord have mercy upon us. On a lonesome patrol, sometimes it's very hard to keep before you the vision that you are just one cog in the greatest piece of organized and perfect machinery ever made, the British Navy. The monotony of the daily routine, unless you fight against it, will found your reserve of courage. The courage that we are called upon to give is and endure. And as my sister pointed out to me, isn't that what we're called upon to do these days in the time of COVID-19? The courage to keep cheerful and endure. Night patrol is a wonderful place for thoughts. There's nothing else to do as you stand on the bridge, wrapped in a duffel coat, sucking at your pipe and gazing over the black waste of waters, trying to pierce the darkness that surrounds you like a curtain. It was said and very truly that it was the long and weary watches of the British Navy that won the war. For 3/4 of a sailor's life in wartime is spent on watching and waiting. The other quarter is fierce excitement. Save petrol is a strict injunction given to movie officers. Hence, we must do a drifting patrol as much as possible, shutting off your engine, setting a watch, and drifting with the current tide and wind for hours together. The movie takes the seas broadside, and you spend your time rolling for the whole of your drifting patrol. This is no gentle sleep-inducing roll either. Every utensil in the galley dances two-step, rolls and sets up a monotonous orchestration of smashing, crashing, and tapping. If you are in your bunk, you must wed yourself securely there, or you will roll out. Any roll worth rolling is worth rolling well, is the motto of our drifting patrol. But of all the ways and means of amusement provided for us aboard our movie, nothing can touch our gramophone. Every day, our gratitude goes out to the Canadian lady who provided us with our music box. So let's learn a little bit more about our movie crew. Known as Harry Tate's Navy, Auxiliary Motorboat Patrol, Fringes of the Fleet, Rooms of the Fleet, and the New Navy. Hand in hand with the average sailor's unconsciousness of bravery is this absolute unconsciousness of danger. We have a job to do. Well then, let's do it. A nobleman, notary, navvy, and nut, a banker, a butcher, a baker, a drover, a dentist, a dustman, a duke, a cabman, a candlestick maker. This war has made sailors as well as soldiers out of the office boy and clerk. Bird was the porter on the Darlington station. Smith in private life was a plumber in London. Jones was an artist for calendars chiefly. I simply mention this that you may realize that our sailors are distinctly civilian sailors. The last member of our crew is Grimy. The name itself needs no explanation. The average man on these patrol boats is a fisherman in peacetime. It is his business to be on the sea, and he would be the first to laugh at being called a hero. He is after no cheap heroics and would do his deeds daily, which would make a landsman gasp and think nothing of it. The engineer aboard these ships is distinctly an expert at his profession. Hats off to the engineers. Theirs is the worst job aboard, and when there is any chance for fun, they get none of the exhilaration of it, but are shut away in a noisome engine room where they must remain till the last order is given and the engine runs off. An officer upon a movie in time becomes an expert in numerous things. He is usually his own signaller upon the semaphore, the Morse lamp, and the flags, besides being general utility man about the ship. So a little bit about movie training. Semaphore we found we had to, some of what we found when we had once learned the alphabet to be simply a matter of practice. As far as Morse is concerned, far harder to learn and far easier to forget. So HMS Vernon in Portsmouth is where the explosives were studied, depth charges, lance bombs, detonators, and Great Horsey Island for experiments of land and underwater explosives. HMS Excellent, Whale Island, most famous gunnery school in the world. The course consisted of a 13-pound gun drill and rifle and revolver instruction and firing, range finding, and miniature moving target firing. If our time comes to die, we do not do so amidst a great battle which thrills the ears of all the world, but nevertheless, a man who loses his life on patrol, say a deckhand, dies just as much for his country and for those he loves at home as one who meets his end laying a gun on a super dreadnought during the greatest naval battle in history. And this is just a little bit of archival documentation. Samuel William Salmon was a Canadian. He was also another commander of M.L.286. So moving on to Operation Dynamo. Of course, known as the Miracle of Dunkirk, the rescue of more than 338,000 British and French soldiers from the French port of Dunkirk. And on Sunday, the 26th of May, 1940, Operation Dynamo began with Vice Admiral Ramsay signal at 6:57 p.m. And all resistance in Dunkirk ended on the 4th of June, 1940 at 9:30 a.m. We shall fight on the beaches. Here was only a fleet of ships, lifeboats and motor yachts, of Dutch scoots and French fishing boats, British coasters and channel ferries of drifters, minesweepers, sloops, destroyers, the strangest fleet in the history of war upon the sea. I do not consider I did any more than my duty. And when I was going through a lot of this archival information a few years ago, what was very touching is that all the documentation about these people who were part of the little ships and Operation Dynamo, they were so humble, and they all basically had this sentiment that they felt that they did not do any more than their duty. So it's a very humbling experience to read all of those personal accounts. M.L.286 had been sold off between late 1919 and 1924 when only 8 of the MLs were still in military service. M.L.286 became Cordon Rouge in private hands. And then in 1930, Eothen, which was still her name at Dunkirk. The Ministry of War Transport includes Eothen in its list of small craft utilized in Operation Dynamo, and the list stands for basic list for the operation. She was returned to Ramsgate and towed at Tennington by Tufts, from where she was requisitioned for service as an auxiliary patrol vessel in the Thames, but she was found to be unsuitable. So after being a little ship, she was returned to her owners in August 1940. Oops. So movie Afterlife. And there's a picture of her again in the 1980s. And I'm very grateful to Paul Hollenby and Rupert Selby for very kindly letting me use these photographs. Eothen wasn't a houseboat when Peter and Carol Barnes owned her. They lived in a house on the Thames and kept her at the bottom of their garden. It was really my parents who were friends of Carol and Peter. I was only a schoolboy at the time, and that's a quote by David Knight, who is the honorary secretary of the Association of Dunkirk Little Ships. And there are a few of her original features, her compass and binnacle. Me and 3 of my friends used to work for the couple who owned this little ship. She was moored in the Thames in Old Windsor opposite Belzevuzli Public House. When I say we worked, we were all about 15 years old back in the summer of 1978. The owners, who were Ron and Greta Gill, had a boat hire service, and we would take charge of the rentals through our summer holidays from school, all for free, as it was such fun. When Ron and Greta Gill purchased her in 1973-74, they did live on her, but she was still a serviceable vessel with all her original fixtures and fittings. She was sold on in the late 1970s, and that's when things started to go downhill. So again, here's some pictures of Eothen and her original wheel and her Dunkirk plaque. And these were actually sold off. So the owner of B.J. Wood and Son Boatyard, Stephen Wood, he was telling me that his father, who's the original owner, sold off some of her parts, and I was able to track down her original wheel, and it's quite thrilling to visit. And so my thanks to Rupert Selby for letting me go aboard his houseboat and take some photographs, and I could see her binnacle as well. So we can now go into movie archaeology. It's the last part of my talk. We're gadgets too, part of the naval machine. That's what we all are, just gadgets. So she had a weary, tired air, as if her health were bad. Her stem had lately come unglued. Her paintwork made me sad. So is M.L.286 a creative combination of watching and waiting and fierce excitement? Well, I think so. So you can see the photo on the left. She might look a bit still, but oh, she's very exciting when you get aboard her and you start to clean her and get all that mud off of her, and it's great to kind of be sinking into that mud and getting her ready for recording. And on the 13th of June, what we were doing in 2018, we actually cleared M.L.286 of vegetation because we were making, or rather, Professor Pablo Rodriguez Navarro from the University of Valencia and his colleague Giorgio Veridiani of the University of Florence, who were doing some photogrammetry and laser scanning of the vessel. And you can see the 3D model of her on the Museum of London website. So here's our baseline, and we were just doing a little bit more archaeology last year. About 6 days cleaning and recording inside of M.L.286 to better understand her details. So as M.L.286 was repurposed as a houseboat, we were trying to decipher between her original softwood fittings and her later hardwood fittings. For if the soul be not in place, what has laid trouble in her face and sits there nothing where wise behind the curtains of her eyes? So there we are. We've got the baseline to draw her porthole. And one of the volunteers, Clive, he found the capstan, which was very exciting. There's her collapsed deck, which we were also recording. So on Sunday, the 21st of July last year, Digging for Britain came along and they filmed us, and that was aired in December last year. And as of March this year, you could find that series on BBC iPlayer. I'm not sure if it's still available, but you can just check that out. And her sights and sounds, dreams happy as her day, and laughter learned of friends, and gentleness in hearts at peace under an English heaven. So I was asking a couple of my friends what their experiences were volunteering, cleaning, and recording M.L.286. So we've got, I'm excited to have an opportunity to be a part of it. It was satisfying to see the color of the wood and its grain. I think it summons up associations and feelings and memories. And this is quite poignant. Her history recalls World War I and World War II and what those conflicts meant to the lives of my parents and grandparents. So there's kind of a personal connection there as well. When she sleeps, her soul I know goes a wander on the air, wings where I may never go, leaves her lying still and fair, waiting empty, laid aside like a dress upon a chair. I think that's such a beautiful sentiment, especially with M.L.286. And there she is, waiting empty, laid aside like a dress upon a chair. So we sort of began our journey today with Lieutenant Jeffrey Stephen Alfrey, and I'd like to finish remembering him. Say a boat strikes a mine or runs into a gale, she may be lost with all hands, or perhaps only one or two escape. The fact, if reported in the papers, and it probably would not be, is counted as naught by the general public. There is nothing spectacular about it, and the public know little of our life. And I'm hoping through my future research with the University of Portsmouth that the public will start to know a lot more about the lives of members of the RNVR, like Lieutenant Jeffrey Stephen Alfrey and Lieutenant Gordon S. Maxwell and Lieutenant Eric P. Dawson, and learn a lot more about M.L.286-Eothen. And just again, just as a final tribute to Lieutenant Jeffrey Stephen Alfrey at the Portsmouth Naval Memorial. And this presentation today is dedicated to all those who served in the Motor Launch Patrol and to all those who served in Operation Dynamo so humbly as well, and to their ships. So here's some useful links. Again, this is being recorded, so you can always look to the recording and go back and look up these useful links. Here's a bit of a quick biography flashing through, and just quickly some final acknowledgements. I can't name everybody, but again, thanks to Mark B.D. Edwards and the Nautical Archaeology Society, to Jack Pink, to Dr. Anthony Firth and Stephen Fisher, to David Knight and Steve McCall, the Senior Media Sales and Licensing Executive of the Imperial War Museum London, who always very kindly granted me permission to use those images of Lieutenant Alfrey. Thank you very much.